3 years ago, I recommended the top 5 Yuri classics that you should watch for Pride Month. Since then, I've gender transitioned, so it's only fitting that I should give you 5 trans anime to watch for Pride Month this time. Now, you might be wondering what constitutes a trans anime, and really there's only one answer: Hourou, Musuko, or Wandering Sun. Originally a much longer manga which has a brief anime adaptation covering just a stint of it. Hourou Musuko is the story of a transgender young girl and boy, their discovery of their transgenderism together and their journey through it as they start as elementary school students and work their way all the way up through high school. Sort of a slice of life story. It's very calm and not super dramatic. The anime is a little bit melodramatic, given that it's written by Mari Okada and that's kind of her style, but in a way that I think creates a unique atmosphere that works for it and is just different enough from the manga that both of them are worth experiencing. This show has characters from all over the gender identity spectrum. The young characters find themselves hanging around with older transgender characters who help them to realize their experiences and actually contextualize it all. It's a journey from not knowing at all why you're having these feelings to a place of being more comfortable with them. I've recommended this show plenty of times over the years, and a lot of people have told me that this show caused them to transition. The number of my viewers who transitioned before me because they realized they were trans through my recommendations makes me wish I was smarter about myself. But whatever, we're all here now, and we all appreciate how this show is just the most trans anime that there really has been. But while Wandering Sun might be the most in-depth anime on covering the trans experience, I also have to give a shout out to the OG of trans-themed anime, being Stop Hibari-kun. Now, Stop Hibari-kun is not something I can recommend to trans people with the same enthusiasm that I do Wandering Sun, because it's not written from a perspective of understanding the trans experience necessarily, even though the author is an admitted trans egg, someone who sees themselves as a woman who never was able to transition and so realizes their feminine ideals through illustration. Higashi Eguchi was also character designer for the recent anime Sunny Boy, and has done tons and tons of phenomenal art of just cute girls over the decades. But got their start with Stop Hibari-kun, which is the story of a young trans girl in high school and the guy who ends up living with her and being her love interest that she is obsessed with. Her father does not accept her transition, but as the series goes along, slowly sort of gets mind broken towards taking her side because Hibari is unstoppable. She's magnetic, she's charismatic, she has a way of working around people to get her own way. She's just such a lovable character, and that's what makes this show work. It brings together her family and the people around her to slowly understand and be more accepting of her transness just because, well, she's so damn good at it. Hibari is an absolute trans icon. I loved watching this show. I think it's a really strong rom-com from the late 80s and way ahead of its time, even if it's still obviously behind modern times in its representation. Nonetheless, I got a lot out of it. Of course, while I may look to Hibari-kun as sort of a trans girl idol, there are also some incredible trans male characters in anime too, and recently we got probably the most exciting character of this type, Kite from Tokyo Sinks 2020. This show is kind of controversial for the fact that it is really all over the place in its tone and writing. It's an apocalyptic adaptation of an older Japanese novel that has been adapted several times into live action and other mediums. This one really goes particularly kooky and insane, being a Science Saru production. It gets experimental, it goes all over the place, the script is kind of a mess, but in a really endearing and interesting way, but the standout part of the show was easily Kite. And it might technically be kind of a spoiler to reveal that Kite is transgender, as we only learned it at the end, but only really important to the character in that they make a very believable trans man. Kite is a super outgoing celebrity from Brazil who transitioned earlier in life, eventually became a YouTuber, somebody with tons of money who paraglides all around the world trying to help people out, and basically ends up becoming a sort of guide and survival strategist for the main characters, and ends up being kind of like the big damn hero in the end. So yeah, Kite is a character that's easy to love, easy to admire, and one of the best trans characters in anime so far. Of course, when it comes to trans pride, I cannot leave behind the non-binary people. It's a little bit more difficult to clarify an exact non-binary anime, as most of these shows aren't going out of their way to be about the non-binary experience so explicitly, but I think would be extremely relatable to people in that category. So I'm going to just break down a few non-binary shows for you. I think Kino from Kino's Journey is one of the most iconic non-binary characters. Kino makes a point to say that while she is assigned female at birth, she doesn't really care what gender pronouns you use or identify as feminine in particular. Kino's a traveler. She's a badass. She never stays in one place for more than 3 days, and makes an admirable and fun character to tote along with on her explorations around the world. Hoseki no Kuni is a show where all of the main characters are gemstones and technically genderless in a similar way to Steven Universe. They are presented sort of androgynously, a little bit more on the feminine side, but different characters have their own personalities that can be more or less feminine, and ultimately the gems don't really come off as being gendered in one way or another. Simoun is an anime that I already recommended in my 5 Yuri classics that you need to watch, but it also has some strong non-binary theming. This is a show that takes place during a war where the only people who can pilot these ships to fight that war are maidens who have not chosen a gender yet, in a world where everyone chooses their gender once they reach 18. And one of the major themes of the show is about not necessarily wanting to have to choose one. I would definitely consider this a trans show in every style of the way, but it's to me most important in how it regards gender as a non-essential question. And of course, I have to mention Haruhi Fujioka from Ouran High School Host Club, a young lady who doesn't really necessarily care that you see her as a young lady and therefore goes through with pretending to be a boy in order to be a part of the Ouran High School Host Club, and doing a really great job and still getting the main guy to fall in love with her, even in spite of the change in appearance. Lastly, I need to give a shout out to some shows that heavily feature transgender characters among their cast. One of the most famous of recent years has been Zombieland Saga, for featuring Lily Hoshikawa, a young girl who transitioned even before her death and is now a zombie. She has a great little emotional episode to herself in the show. You have Alice Arisuin from Chivalry of a Failed Knight, which mostly is a pretty standard high school superpowers fighting show that seems pretty generic, and I've done an extensive comparison of it against the Asterisk War back in my Asterisk War Sucks series, but one of the most interesting things about it was the explicitly transgender character Alice, who is kind of like the moral and ethical center of the entire show, by far the best character and most likable. So yeah, Alice, definitely strong trans representation. Aluka from Hunter x Hunter is never explicitly considered trans, but considering that most characters will refer to her as male except for Killua, who is very clear that Aluka is female, suggesting the transgender nature of the character, and she's always been beloved for it. The character Grell from Black Butler is apparently transgender. I don't know much about this character, but they're popular and listed as trans, which is also all I can say for the character Toru from Tokyo Ghoul Re. I don't know anything about him. Nor Seiko from Lovely Complex, though I do want to watch the rest of that show. And of course, I have to mention Hana from Tokyo Godfathers, who might be seen as an offensive transgender stereotype to some people, as she falls into the sort of camp, flamboyant Okama class of trans that the Japanese were already in recognition of before having terms like transgender. But the character is strongly written, is very well portrayed, is overall great, and this whole movie is a feel-good, heart-filling type experience. So, you know, I think if you're willing to open your heart to Hana, you will absolutely love her. Shouts out to Paradise Kiss and Wonder Egg Priority, and that's about all the stuff I'm going to mention in this video right now. If there's other transgender characters or shows or manga that deal with transgender themes that you think I definitely need to check out, let me know about it in the comments below, and if you want me to make full videos on any of the shows that I've talked about here. You can find more of my writing on goldenwitch.substack.com, and you can support my channel through patreon.com/goldenwitchfire. Find me at Golden Witch Fire on all social media platforms, and listen to my podcasts linked in the description, such as the Jittery Zeitgeist Hip Hop Review podcast over on the ASE Presents channel, as well as the New Void Gazers podcast. Make sure to subscribe and ring the bell because YouTube doesn't push my videos to people, and remember, anime forever.